What I would like to do now is just do an experiment taking you through these steps that you can then apply to remote viewing an object in a box, doing the emotive listening, doing this with your team, doing what's called psychometry, where you hold someone's object and sense information about them. You know that technique, where you hold. This is just going to be a technique, but I'm going to take you carefully, and this is going to seem a little more laborious than what you actually need to do, but it's because I want you to understand the steps. Does this make sense? And the process. And then you can do it more and more rapidly. So the idea is you don't have to do it in this detailed and slow a way when you're in your team or by yourself, but you need to understand what the steps actually are that lead to effective remote viewing on a reproducible basis. One other comment is that the reason I teach this approach rather than some of the others that basically trick the mind intellectually, a lot of the techniques that are used by the military remote viewing projects don't actually utilize the development of consciousness as the main paradigm. They're actually doing techniques that trick the monkey mind so that people can remote view. What's the difference? It's huge. Because I remember the head of Army Intelligence telling me about taking a bunch of his guys through the Monroe Institute, who were young Army Intelligence fellows, and they didn't have any real understanding of trans-dimensional physics, consciousness, non-locality, and they were just put through the course. And they actually were very good, got very good at the remote viewing of a target in the Soviet Union or whatever it was. However, so many of them ended up having mental breakdowns, committing suicide, becoming alcoholics, etc., because this ability was unleashed in a kind of a brutal way to get a task done without the concomitant or contemporaneous development of consciousness and wisdom and understanding. So it just basically blew their minds. Does this make sense? David Morehouse, when I was with him years before he had his book come out, he was one of the really adept remote viewers that the military had. He said every single one of us ended up becoming alcoholics, mental breakdowns, institutionalized, divorce, suicide, because the approach they were taking was one that didn't allow for this holistic development of higher consciousness that then spontaneously leads to the unfolding of the cities. So this is why you don't want to just force. There are things I could do to teach people that would just, boom, get them there. But if they haven't developed this higher consciousness ability, two things happen. One, it becomes an asymmetric development of their internal environment. Very important to realize this. And that causes perturbations in their stability, and they get unstable. The other thing that happens is that without the development of higher consciousness, there is a tendency to use this ability for selfish or harmful reasons. And in an enlightened state, because you enter into this deep understanding of consciousness, you don't want to harm someone else because you know you're actually harming yourself because you are all beings. This is the heart of compassion that the Buddha speaks about. Does this make sense? So that means that you're not going to have this proclivity to learn an ability and then apply it to do a psychic assassination or something like this, or the Project Amethyst at the National Security Agency, where they train people to use consciousness and other technologies to kill people in their sleep. You know about Project Amethyst? Oh, well, I just spilled the beans on a big one. But so that kind of thing, and I knew a man who was in the project. Oh boy. Really interesting. A magnetic field meter. Well, that's just what I said. I mean, it was a project where they had people who utilized both technologies that were transdimensional and conscious interface with innate abilities to do selective assassinations. And that those systems have been available for a very long time. So everything, I look at this as the field of consciousness, and you can use it for good, or you can take your ego or other people and try to do something that is forced and damaging. And so the path of safety, not only is it more effective and a faster way of doing it, but a way of doing this safely is to develop higher states of consciousness and enlightenment so that these cities evolve spontaneously and are used only for the good. A lot of people are shocked that, I think it was 1993 or 4, a man who invented an electronic system that was a TAC. Yesterday I've been talking about CAT, consciousness-assisted technologies. Where the consciousness assists the technology in doing something, like these random number generators. But there are also technologies that actually you can hook yourself up to that assist the consciousness in attaining remote viewing and non-locality and applications. And those are, of course, interstellar civilizations have both. This man who was, I guess, in his mid-80s when I met him, in the 90s, who's since passed away, had developed such a system around 1956, where you could hook yourself up to this electronic system, and anyone, doesn't matter how enlightened, unenlightened they were, would get into a state of consciousness where they could remote view accurately anywhere. And he offered it to me for the 𝗖𝗍 teams. I said, no, thank you. Because if the people have that ability, but they haven't developed a nonviolent consciousness, enlightenment, and aren't doing this for the purpose of universal peace, it would be very dangerous. Moreover, almost certainly I would have been killed at that time to take possession of such a technology. So I said, that's all right, thank you very much for the offer. And I asked him, I said, well, what happened to it? He says, well, I developed it because I thought this would be something great for the public and it would demonstrate the true nature of consciousness and reality. This is in the 50s. If Adam Curry is listening, this would be great for him to hear this, and Dr. John at Princeton. So I was about 1 year old when this was out, and a toddler. But he said what happened is that a corporation that was a front company for the CIA bought it out. And it was basically, you sell it to us or we're going to take it anyway and you're dead. So this has happened for many, many, many decades. And the safer approach is this very ancient and innate ability to connect to the quiet mind and develop this so that your entire internal spiritual reality is enlightened. And from there, you develop the cities, consciousness, assisted technologies, remote viewing, bilocation, interstellar contact, all that's emanating from a paradigm that is innately from this enlightened field, where then it's very hard, not that it can't happen, but it's less likely for the ego to spin sideways out of control and use it in harmful ways. So that's why I teach it this way. Does this make sense to folks, you know? I dropped these little vignettes just to give you illustrations of the risks of doing things unwisely. Not everything that can be done should be done. And there are wise ways to do things, and there are unwise ways. There are life-supporting ways and ways that are incredibly dangerous. And this gets to the question of how are we going to go forward as a civilization that with this kind of knowledge, both technological and in consciousness, we need to have the wise elders. So instead of a bunch of misanthropic sociopaths running these covert programs and dealing with the ET presence. We need the Dalai Lama and Paul Hellyer and you guys and some other, we need to have the best of humanity, not the worst. And, yeah. And I think, those of you in the room are really represent the best of humanity and those listening. And the average person on earth are basically very, very good people. Living in the Middle East, I came to realize that it takes very few fanatics to ruin it for everyone. And people who live in Latin America, most of them wonderful people. It takes a very small percentage of people who are psychopathic drug lord gangs to ruin it for Guatemala and Honduras and Mexico. So it really takes a very small percentage of the population, but that only happens when we give up our power and people are intimidated and shirk off the responsibility. So this gets into this whole question of how did we get here? And I think this is where you get into the idea of spiritual courage. And if I were to name one thing that has resulted in the world being in its retarded state, where we've lost 100 years of conscious and technological evolution, it isn't because of some boogeyman and cabal you want to hate. It's because the average person has given up their responsibility to do the right thing over and over and over again. And I have witnessed this. So rather than blaming someone else, look in the mirror and say, what can I do? And do it with courage. That's why I left medicine to do this. Because I realized after many meetings with people like the CIA director and these senior officials and Senate Intelligence Committee members and doing briefings for presidents, those folks weren't going to do it. They didn't have the courage to do it. So having the knowledge isn't enough, having the information isn't enough, having power isn't enough, having money isn't enough. You also have to have the courage to do it. And again, getting back to what I was sharing last night, a little of this state of consciousness, that's the dawn of what's called the Shambhala warrior. And not warrior in the sense of violence, but true inner courage that comes from spirit and heart, where you're not intimidated and you do the right thing, no matter what. We need more people to do that. And it's become a very, sadly, rare commodity on earth to find people who live their life that way and walk that talk. And really that's what we need. And we need a lot of them, not me by myself, we need millions of people who get this and just simply are not going to be intimidated anymore and will stand up to the bullies and the thugs. So, sort of like getting back to I call it, these gangs, but you have the gangbangsters, all right, in the financial system, and they're puppets in the military and intelligence services. But it's a relatively small number of very powerful sociopathic people, and we don't have to give up our future to that. But we will unless we come together in a united and clear way to make a change happen. And as the Chinese saying goes, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. I love that because it's obviously true, but no one thinks about where the hell are we going? So we have to think about this, and where we are headed is not in a good direction. But we can change that direction through mass field consciousness and mass action, doing this all together, which is another reason why all these technologies and sciences have to be brought forward with the whole world watching. If you had a $100 million venture capital fund, you better spend $40 million of it on PR and advertising, like you would for a movie. And the other 60 goes into the technology development, and you'd have it. Because you need to have stakeholders who aren't just money people, but are the men and women of Earth. Because if those folks are on your side, these other interests can't do anything about it. And the more you give into the impulse of fear, and do things secretively. Like when people come up to me and whisper, I said, forget about that. Shout it from the rooftops. Because doing things in that furtive, secretive way, you're on their dance floor. Remember, they own the night, we own the light. Disclosure, out, boom. It doesn't mean I don't keep confidences when asked to, I do. But I'm talking about what we have to do as a culture is to reverse that dynamic of secrecy into openness. And on technologies that deal with consciousness, even more so. But there has to be people people need to speak to this in a wise way so that it's understood that, like all tools, you can have a knife and you can cut your steak with it, or you can slit someone's throat with it. The knife doesn't care. It's the consciousness that wields it. And so we have to understand there's a responsibility to wielding this kind of information, knowledge, power, whether it be in consciousness or energy generation or electromagnetogravitics, anti-grav. Now, just so to be the record clear, we are not interested in pursuing the Z plane right now, the vertical plane, things that fly, because those are obviously quickly weaponizable as a delivery system for a missile. And the world isn't at the point where that should happen. We're wanting to bring out the knowledge of the sciences of consciousness for positive mass conscious change, as well as the sciences of zero-point energy generation that run your house and car. Things that fly, that's phase 2. That's later. I always tell people who don't bite off more than you can chew, or as the people on Wall Street say, hogs get slaughtered. So, our whole civilization is really on its back. So we want to walk before we levitate. Let's take this one step. So that we want to get up and moving and get to a level 1 or 2 civilization first. Where did that come from? Somebody's phone? Strange. Okay. Oh, okay. Interesting. So that's sort of the paradigm. I could teach you this technique to realize that the consciousness techniques and the technologies all need to have the same impulse of being in the good and doing for others and being at service for, and not something that should be centered around self-aggrandizement or selfish purposes. And it isn't that you can't do that. The Army intelligence folks certainly did it. The CIA folks certainly have done it. But just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done, or that it's helpful in the long run. It's actually very counterproductive in the long run. And actually, this is what this general was telling me. It was actually an incredibly counterproductive effort. And Ingo Swann said the same thing. And that's why I try to the extent I can, share a paradigm of consciousness and consciousness technologies and techniques within a paradigm of universal peace and something that moves society forward. And that's how I would ask that all of you continue to utilize this. So, are you ready to do a little meditation? Yeah? And then we'll do... Oh. So I'm going to see if I can do... This is when I scream, "Nurse, help me." Oh. Oops. Well, there are 300 technicians here and no help. Okay.
Are you all right there?
No.
Here's
You don't ask a doctor. You don't ask a doctor to do something mechanical like that. A chest tube, no problem. This, forget about it. Is that good? Can you hear me? Oh, wonderful. Okay. So we might want to dim, this is lit up like a crazy place. That's the most sensitive level of the magnetic field meter doing this. Just as I started to say, we're going to ring the Tibetan prayer bowl, go into meditation together, and do this remote viewing exercise. There's nothing that's moved over there that's an electromagnetic device. It's very strange. We're going to get into some really cool stuff tonight about all these electronics. I'm not doing this. This is an unscheduled, bizarre thing. It's like R2-D2 chattering. Be quiet. Yeah, I know. But it's because we're wired in. I'm going to explain what just happened tonight or later today on that. So let's sit quietly and close our eyes. I'm going to ring the Tibetan prayer bowl. And this can be used just like a mantra. When I ring it, you'll hear the ringing tone. And the correct way to use these is to use them as like you would listen to chanting or a mantra or music, is to let your mind rest on it, however, with your eyes closed, and have your mind become centered on the tone, and then become aware of the mind watching the tone. And at the point that the tone fades away at the end, you are left with just a contemplation of the mind itself. As we sit here in silence, let us take some deep breaths in with our nose and out with our mouth. And as we breathe in with our nose, see our third eye and our awareness expanding, and our body filled with light and energy. And as we exhale, allow ourselves to release and let go of all of our limitations and concerns, and all doubts and all that holds us back from the ocean of consciousness teeming within each of us. And with each inward breath, we draw in the prana, the chi, the life force that is conscious, and we are more awake and energized and harmonious. And with each exhalation, we become more relaxed and peaceful and calm. And our entire body, from our toes all the way up to the top of our head, is at once enlivened and relaxed, energized but steady and calm. And now let us breathe normally and gently watch the breath. And as we breathe in and breathe out, we become aware of the mind watching the breath. And it is awareness of awareness. And all perceptions, whether they be sounds, physical feelings, thoughts, the breath, we allow them to come and go and feel the joy and the ease of just being aware of the mind watching the breath, perceiving all things. And as we gently become more aware of the mind, we behold it as a vast and infinite field of consciousness. And that each of us as individuals are apertures, openings, vessels, in which this indivisible field of consciousness is present in its totality and fullness at all times. And that the nature of the consciousness, the mind, when we are deep and silent and calm, is that it is unbounded, infinite, eternal. It transcends the boundaries of space and time, and yet is present at every point in space and time in its fullness, just like a quantum hologram. And so now let us dive into this quiet mind, settling into this vast ocean. And becoming deeper and more quiet. And the breath becomes very faint. And as we go into the quietness of mind, we recede from the turmoil of perceptions. And the perceptions of thought, self, sound, all that we perceive are like distant ripples and waves on the ocean of this infinite mind within us. And so each of us, as drops of individual creation, allow ourselves to merge into this one mind that is the true nature of the self. And we go now more deeply into silentness, quietness, peace. And we feel the joy and the serenity of the place that is the placeless, this eternal home that resides within each and everything and every being. So let us sit in silent meditation for a few moments. If you become distracted, return to the breathing technique, or you may use the mantra. And let us just meditate and go into deeper appreciation of the quiet mind and know its true nature is infinite and unbounded and omnipresent. Now in this relaxed state, let us affirm to ourselves, with no doubt, that the nature of consciousness is that it's omnipresent, not limited to just ourselves or this place, but is always a field of undivisible, pure consciousness. And very gently, let us bring into our awareness the geography of North America, and very effortlessly, since the mind is omnipresent, and instantaneously we float over to the East Coast and crossing the Appalachian Mountains, we come into the area in Virginia near Thomas Jefferson's home and the University of Virginia. And we see the great rotunda in the center of the campus, built by Thomas Jefferson. And the city of Charlottesville, Virginia. And then as we come west towards the Blue Ridge Mountains into the countryside, we see my home. And it sits on about 65 acres on a knoll overlooking the Blue Ridge in Shenandoah. And as we descend from above, we see the entry to the property, and we see the house, and we see 2 dogs that are outside. a female named Rosie, and a male named Chance. And without straining or guessing, remaining in this quiet state of mind, we take a tour of the property, and we float around the house from all directions. The front entry, the back, the sides. And we see these two dogs, and we see what they look like. Their color, their size, their personalities. And we do this like a child would approach any joyful thing, something that is fun and easy. And if we find at any moment we are straining or guessing, we just go back to the contemplation of the mind, the breathing, the mantra, and become centered and calm. And then we return back to the farm to see the house and the dogs. And so each time we find ourselves intellectualizing or guessing, we stop the process and return to centering into the vast, silent ocean of awareness and allow the image of these dogs to pop into our minds and what the property and the structures look like. And it unfolds effortlessly, as if the mind is an infinite screen and anything you wish to perceive within it can be played or emerge onto the screen. And so I will be silent, and we will continue to remote view the property and the dogs and practice this technique of meditation, going deep and silent within, and then gently intending to know or see or feel the two dogs and the property without straining or guessing. Now, as we begin to return to this room, we send a light of guidance and protection to that property and say goodbye for now. And we return here, and very gently, we become aware again of this space here in Desert Hot Springs. And then when you're ready, you may slowly open your eyes. And as you open your eyes, affirm, being mindful, that the nature of the consciousness within you is always omnipresent, non-local, not limited by space and time. And so even as I begin to share what the property and the dogs look like, you can continue to remote view the property and the dogs with your eyes open, because your mind is channel one, and your eyes and all other senses are secondary. Primacy is with consciousness. So welcome.